Right. We are beginning a new week with God's help, and one day less of exile, one day closer to Moshiach. Should come any moment now. It's crazy. Okay, we'll begin the day by giving charity as usual. Charity makes the redemption come close. Charity. Tzedakah makareves zagula. Tzedakah tatzamimolet. All right. Step number one. Step number two. Now we can learn the Torah. This week's Torah's portion is Pinchas. A lot of very interesting things in this week's Torah portion. And one of them is the sacrifices. It talks about the sacrifice, also talks about the holidays, talks about the dividing up of the land of Israel. It talks about the sacrifices. And one of the sacrifices it talks about is what's called the daily offering. The daily offering. One is offered in the morning, the other is offered in the evening. A sheep. A sheep is offered in the morning, the sheep is offered in the evening. Every day. The first offering of the day is a sheep, and the last offering of the day is a sheep in the Holy Temple. In the Holy Temple, it opened up near the rising of the sun, and it closed at about, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That was the last, generally speaking, the last in the year. Right. Now, we have a very basic question, which is, what in the world does this have to do with Judaism? What is Judaism in general? What's going on? What is Judaism? For some reason, it just doesn't go away. This Judaism doesn't go away. There's billions of other religions, and Judaism has, at most, there's like 20 million Jews or something like that in the world. Maybe there's more that they don't know. But how many are practicing? Jews that actually do the commandments, a few million. And that's the way it's been through all the generations. There were brief times when all the Jews were in Israel altogether. That was very brief, only in the first temple. And then in the second temple already, the Jews were scattered around. So maybe there were brief times in the second temple as well. But generally speaking, Jews have been scattered all over the world. And somehow or other, there's something that's held them all together, that they all know that they're Jews and they all feel that they're Jews. And a lot of them despise Judaism and they hate Judaism and they reject Judaism. But they, for some reason, do not in the end deny that they're Jews. Jews have this amazing thing, Jewish identity. So what is it that keeps Jews Jews? And then now let's look at what is actually a practicing Jew, right? A Jew that really does the whole business. What is it? One of the main things in Judaism is the sacrifices, animal sacrifices. And we pray every day, religious Jews, we pray every day, 3 times a day, that God, you should rebuild the temple, right? You should dwell in Israel like you said you were going to be, and you should rebuild the holy temple. What's going to be in the temple? We're going to make sacrifices again. So, and one of the main sacrifices was this daily sacrifice in the morning and in the evening. So what in this world has this got to do with making sacrifices, and why has that got any? What contribution does that make, if any, to the apparent immortality of Judaism? Huh? Judaism just sort of keeps hanging around, and everybody hates. Now that's another thing. Number 2, everybody hates Judaism throughout the generations. Everyone hates Judaism. Everybody. It's a ubiquitous thing. They've been kicked out of every country almost. Anti-Semitism is a term that really can't really sort of define it. Why? First of all, why is it called anti-Semitism? Why isn't it called, anti-Judaism? Why is it called anti-Judaism? Or just called, just simple bigotry or something like that. What is anti-Semite? What's a Semite? Go to any town and say, where are the Semites? You tell me where the Semites live. Where's the area? The area of the Semites? There's a Semite house, right? You dirty Semite. There's no such thing. What is a Semite? I can't stand those Semites. I just see a Semite and it drives me crazy. I hate the Semites. No, nobody knows what it is. No one even uses the term. And nevertheless, that's the term given. It's like this sort of obscured, term for hating Jews. And nobody even knows really what Jews are. So you want to know what Jews are? Here we go. Sacrifices. That's what the term is with the Jews are, the sacrifices. That's the main thing of Judaism. Now we don't have the sacrifices. So we have prayer in the place of sacrifices. That's what it says. But we're waiting for the third temple that we can do those sacrifices again because we need those sacrifices. What in the world do we need sacrifices for? So let's see. Let's have this. Tzavet b'nei Yisrael, command the Jewish people. Omar, this is God speaking to Moses. Tzavet b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. Omar to aleim, and say to them, Et korbani lachmi l'ishai. My sacrifice, my bread, this is God speaking. It is bread to my fire. They burned fire on the altar, right? So just let you know what was going on over there. They would bring the animal to the temple. They'd have to check it to see that there's no blemishes in it. And then they would slaughter it. And then they would gather the blood in a vessel. And then they would pour the blood on the altar. And then they would take the pieces of the sacrifice. They had to cut it up into pieces. It was a special way to cut it up. And then they would throw it, they would take it up the ramp and throw it up onto the fire on the altar. And it would burn up on the altar. It says there was a fire that came down from heaven also that used to eat it up, at least in the first temple. Fire that came from heaven. Okay. So here we go. Here's the sentence. Tzavet b'nei Yisrael, command the Jewish people. God is speaking to Moses. Command the Jewish people, and say to them. Already you see there's a big question. What does it mean, command them and say to them? What's that? Okay, what are you supposed to command and say what? Et korbani lachmi l'ishai, my sacrifice, my bread to my fire. Next sentence. Ve'amarta aleim, and say to them, another time to say to them. Ze'al yisha, this is the fire offering, asher takriva, that you should sacrifice to God. At the keves echad, one sheep make in the morning and one sheep you make in the evening. Right, there's a sentence. Now you have to remember who's writing this, whose words are these? These are the words of God. These are the words of God speaking to Moses. That's what the whole Torah is. The whole Torah is a big story that God is telling over to Moses. Like God is telling this over, and it's written in the third person. What does it mean? The God said to Moses, who was writing this down? Should say, I say to Moses. Okay, that's a different question. So here's God speaking to Moses, and he says like this: command the Jewish people, say to them, my sacrifice, to my bread, to my fire, and say to them, this is the fire offering that you should bring, you should sacrifice. One sheep in the morning, one sheep in the evening. Okay, why would God write down things like this? How does God write things down in general? But that's a different thing. That's the God of Israel. The God of Israel cares about details. Okay, let's introduction. We're making an introduction to the God of Israel. Lahavin, let us understand the kefil, the double. And why is it repeated? Beit Pam or Marta. Why does it say V'amarta leim? Say to them V'amarta leim another time. V'gam shinoi lashon. Why does it say? First it says this is the sacrifice. V'amarta lezeh asher takrivu. This is the sacrifice that they should make. And then it says that keves echad, one sheep you should make. Huh? Really, this is not they. This is you, plural. Asher takrivu. This is the sacrifice that you, plural, you all should make. And then it says you, singular. Also, why does it say takrivu? This is plural. You, plural, should say. And then it says ta'aseh. This is what you should make, singular. There's a lot more questions you can ask. The Torah is full of questions. The Torah is really full of questions. It was God purposely made it that way, so we would ask the questions and that we would try to get answers. At least as far as action goes, you have to know exactly what to do. That's the purpose of the rabbis. Okay, so here's a few questions we've got about the sacrifice. So let's go. Says and also, what is the main thing? What does this mean to us? The Torah is supposed to be eternal. So, okay, when the third temple is built, maybe it'll be relevant to us. But what is it relevant to us now? And that's what Chassidut is here for, to tell us what does this mean to me and you right now. And it's like this. Kol makom, any place, shene'amar, that it says tzav. Tzav, this is what the rabbi said. Kol makom that says tzav. Tzav means a command. The word tzav means now and for all the generations. God is telling Moses, this is what you should do now, and it is also a commandment for all generations. So that's what it means, kefil. That's why it doubles over and says, v'amarta aleim, twice. V'amarta aleim, you should say to them, v'amarta aleim, another time. Why? Because amarta aleim, that means now. God's saying, this is what I want them to do now. This is the topic of the sacrifices that are made and will be made in the time of the Holy Temple. First temple, second temple. That's the first Amarta Aleim. And the second, the Amarta Aleim, that means Amarta on the second temple, the second sacrifice is Hainu, the Dorot, for all of the future generations when there is no temple. What type of sacrifices are we supposed to make now there's no temple? Shetiknu tefillah, that the rabbis established that prayer is in the place of sacrifices. Okay, in order just to understand this a little bit, what is prayer? We've talked about this before. You have to buy yourself, or at least attain for yourself, or maybe you can even download a genuine Jewish prayer book. Genuine Jewish prayer book. Doesn't make any difference which one it is. There's slight differences. There's Ashkenazic and there's Sephardic and there's Hasidic style, and then there's Chabad. Right? You can look, and it doesn't really make any difference. This differences between them are very slight. The point of prayer, though, is that it is a buildup of understanding until your heart becomes convinced that God really does exist, that God really is creating us, that God really does care, that God really does listen to our prayers, that everything we have we owe to God. He's giving us everything, and he'll continue giving us everything, whether we thank him or not. That's why we owe him everything. And how good God is, and how powerful God is, and how wonderful God is, then our hearts start to become elevated and aware of the Creator. That was the purpose of the sacrifices also. We'll see. Hainu Ladorot, that, okay, so Amarta Aleim, the first one is talking about the temples, the sacrifices. And the second Amarta Aleim, that's talking about me and you nowadays in our prayers. We have to understand, how can it be that prayer corresponds or is in the place, replaces the sacrifices? And the sacrifices are sheep, animals, b'nei shana. The sacrifices are just a deed. You bring a sheep in the morning, a sheep in the evening, and prayer is requesting from God mercy or getting excited about God, whatever. How can it be in the place of the sacrifices? I have to understand another thing. The sacrifices were done by the Kohanim, the priests, the Kohanim in the temple. So the rest of the Jewish people, they didn't really participate in these daily sacrifices. They didn't sacrifice. People brought sacrifices on special occasions or in the time of the holidays. Everybody had to bring sacrifices. And even then they brought one sacrifice, they wanted a few. Here's a daily sacrifice that was brought, and no one really participated in it. It was only done by the Kohanim, which is not the case with prayer. Prayer, everybody does. Everyone is supposed to pray. So prayer is a personal thing between you and God, and the sacrifices were sort of like a communal thing, if you want to call it that, a general holy temple thing. So how could it possibly be that our prayers now take the place of the sacrifices. And even though, why did we even have to do the sacrifices at all? Why even have, why didn't we just pray all the time? That's what everybody else does. Huh? That's what everybody else does. Here we got these other religions that claim that they replaced Judaism, that now they are the Jews. They don't claim that they made sacrifices. They don't make sacrifices, right? What is sacrifice? Who makes sacrifices nowadays? I don't think even in Africa they make sacrifices. I don't know. Okay, so sacrifices. So nowadays we have prayer is in the place of the sacrifice. Come also understand. We also understand what it says in the sacrifices. What does it say? It says, sacrifice, reach nichoach. You'll see later on. It says in the sacrifices that the sacrifices are called reach nichoach. What does it mean, reach nichoach? A pleasing spirit to God, or a pleasing smell to God. Lashon nachat ruach. Nachat ruach means it pleases God. Eh? We burn up want to know how to make God happy? Take a sheep, burn it up in the holy temple, and then God's happy. What type of a God is that? That's what he wants? To burn us up. Right? Why wouldn't in the world would God be happy if we burned up a sheep? Give God money or something. Give him, build him a big temple or some statue. Who knows what? An obelisk. Make something. Why in the world killing a sheep makes God happy? By Noah, it says the same thing. By Noah, it says that Noah got out of the ark after the flood and he offered up sacrifices. And it said, and God was angry. Before that, God was angry at the world. He brought a big flood. And then Noah was like the only person in the generation that didn't sin. So God made a big flood, wiped everybody out. And Noah got out and he made sacrifices. And God smelled the pleasant smell. How could God have pleasure from the smell of the sacrifices? What type of God are we worshiping over? What's going on? God likes, huh? And that's the God that has held the Jewish people together for thousands of years, despite all adversity, because he likes the smell of sacrifice. What's happening here? Says the Rebbe, but the fact is the sacrifices are very important. Why? Know what it is known, the real reason that God puts our souls into this world, to be put into a body, in an animal soul, Yorida L'tzorech Aliyah, it is a descent in order that there should be afterwards an elevation. Okay, here we go. But most people consider that, how are you born? Your mother and your father, you have relations, and then you get born. like everything, like a squirrel, like a cat, like everything. Right? There's male and female, and then you just get born. And if you're religious, so you believe that God gives you life and that God helps you, that God helps us. So Chassidut comes and tells us that that's the way it seems, and certainly that's the way it is. This certainly is, but that's only a very superficial process that you're looking at. It's a very superficial process you're looking at. It's almost like saying, how does a car work? Very simple. You put the key in the thing, you turn it, and it works. What's under the hood? I don't know. It's under the hood. Why does it stop working if there's no gas? I don't know that. I don't know. You just put the gas in. Right? We're only looking at the very external of the thing. People get born. And yes, okay. Says the Rebbe, no, it's very deep. And let's take the essence of that deepness. Where the deepest of the soul coming into the body. There's all these. God purposely creates a world. And God purposely puts in this world people, bodies, and God purposely puts souls into those bodies. And then with the Jewish people, God puts a soul inside of those souls, inside of the bodies. Jewish people, sort of speak, have two souls. That's what it says in the Chassidut. That's what Chassidut teaches. What's a soul? What's a soul? A human soul is different from an animal soul. Human beings, they can think, they can, like you say, extrapolate, they can convince people. One of the things, they can improve their condition, right? Improve their condition, they can improve nature, human beings. And Jews, so regular human beings, because they have a sense of maybe there's something more than what we see. Maybe we can improve the situation. The Jews, they have that, but they also have a sense that maybe God wants something from the world. That's what's called the godly soul. It's a feeling of responsibility to God. Maybe God wants something from the world. Maybe I can do something. A normal, regular human being, he's in the world. How can I improve the world for myself? And comes along some rabbi, a priest, or somebody and says, rabbi, priest, doesn't make a difference, and says, listen, you're just talking about this world. What about after you die? What's going to be then? Oh, I didn't think about that. Well, I did. And I'm telling you what's going to happen. You want to improve this world? Wonderful. But you have to also make some investment in the world to come. How do I do that? Come to church, come to the mosque, come to the synagogue, come to the whatever it is. And that's your investment in the world to come. That's called the natural soul. The natural soul is spiritual. Think about yourself. But inside of a Jew, that's what makes Jews Jews. That's what makes Jews eternal. Inside of every Jew, regardless, there is what's called the godly soul. And this godly soul feels responsibility to God. So in other words, there's also this feeling I have to improve my situation, improve the world, and etc. like that. But the main thing is that there's God. And God is creating us. And God puts the soul into the body. And God, that we have a responsibility. Why does God put the soul into the body? Oh, it says this, God puts the soul into the body, not just that we should improve our situation here in this world or the next world. He does it in order that there should be an elevation. What's the elevation? That we can serve the Creator. Now we can go out of the selfishness. That is truly unique. There's nothing in creation that is not selfish. Everything in the world is working for itself. Everything. Right? Newton, whatever discovered, everything has a power of gravity. I don't know how right he was, but anyways, everything is pulling toward itself. You have a mass, everything is thinking about themselves. The Jews are ideally supposed to, at least they can, think about the Creator. That's what it means, elevating. Hine, behold, before the world was created, all there was God. Before God created the world, when God created the world, He created time also, right? So really, before there was time, before there was existence, before there was consciousness, before there was, which makes no sense because they can't be before if there was no time. So when God created this whole idea of before, so it says there was God before God created the world, before God created time, before God created existence, all there was God and His name. Right, this is getting like really Kabbalistic. Shemo, what it means, God's name, is the same numerical value as God's will, Ratzon. Shehu Makor Hashpah, this is the source and the life force of the creations. Now, after we understand also that before the world was created is right now also, because there was no such thing as before. This makes no sense, but that's the fact. Again, we're talking about this, really, basically nothing makes sense. We can't understand how we're here, why there's laws of nature, why, right? Why? Let's just say the Newton is right. Every body that there is in the world attracts other bodies. Why? I don't know, electrical, something like that. Why? Why is it electrical? Why? That's just the way things work. That's what nature is. So who creates nature? You don't ask any questions about nature, right? That's the nature of things. We just try to discover what the nature is of things. But so God is creating nature. God is creating nature, which means that God is above nature. So you can't really attribute any laws to God. Right, wrong. That's what the Torah is. The Torah are the laws of God. So God put us into this world. Why? So that we should be able to do His will, His plan. That's what there is before the world. That's God's will. That's the source of, okay, so let's not talk about what there was. We're talking about what there is now. God is creating the world right now. Because again, time doesn't play with God. So God is creating everything. To us, it seems there's time to, okay, this is a big mystery we're talking about over here. The fact of the matter is that God is creating the world. And what do you mean there's no time? In the Torah, it says that there's time. It says that God took 7 days to create the world. It says that there's certain holidays, there's certain times, there's certain this, right? The flood lasted for 40 days and it was on the world for a year, whatever it was. Everything is time. What do you mean there's no time? Of course there's time. Abraham gave birth to Yitzchak. Yitzchak came before Jacob. There is time. Time exists. Of course there's time. It says, okay, everything exists, but it exists within a bigger framework of God's infinite purpose. That's called God's will. So it says that's what it means that God is one. Now, God's will is infinitely good. This world does not partake of that good in a very full sense. And that's the job of the Jewish people. So that's what it means to make an elevation. Like it says, Yachid Chayolomin Melech, like it says that God is alone. In the life of the worlds, he becomes a king. Shehu Lavada, that God is alone, Yachidim Yuchad, totally unlike anything else in creation. God, like we said so many times, God does not really exist. God creates all existence. His existence is infinitely more real than anything we can imagine. But he is creating the world. He's creating the world. So in order to create the world, Yuchad, God alone is alone and unique. Unique. But in order to enliven and to create the worlds, this only comes from his aspect of kingship, the lowest aspect of God. That's what it says in the Bible, that God created the world by speech, spoke. Now, this is going on right now. It's going on, constant process. The place where the world created in this place where the world exists, all there was just the oneness of God, that God's kingship was included in God's essence. This is before he started creating the world. And it's called Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God, which this is just a light and a ray of godliness. So it was infinitely more real than we are. Infinitely more real than this whole world is. That's what this world just partakes a little bit of God's reality. But this world is tremendously important to God. That's why God creates it. He doesn't just create it to see us running around like rats, in a maze or something. Everything that happens in this world is very important to God. This makes no sense, but that's God. God makes no sense. But it's true. Now, why God wants the sacrifices, that's what we're getting around to. So before God created the world, before the Breshit, before the first letter of the creation, the light of God was included in the source of light itself. And after God created the world, right, 5,785, soon it's going to be 6 years ago, then God's light, so to speak, spread. The Ziv and the ray was there in order to enliven everything from nothing, really. Liyesh, to be something, really. Beseder Ishtalshlut, and the whole order of creation, and levels from cause and effect until this physical world. Shehu Yesh Agashmi, this is the physical, actually mundane, material, crass, low world, seeming to be something separate totally from God. Now, that's why God made it. So that's one of the reasons that God made the laws of nature, and he made all these details in the world so that it would be seemingly obvious that God does not exist. That's what God did it. He made the world very complicated in such a way, and the world, there's actions and reactions and laws of nature and things like that, that it seems obvious that the world gets along very well without a creator. Who you read a Gadol is a tremendous descent regarding God's light and ray. Maybe in simple English, we can say that this world does not seem to have any importance or meaning at all. Everything just is. But what does it mean, all the blades of grass in some field in the middle of Argentina or something? Who cares? God cares about that? He says, yes, God cares about every little detail. That's only on this planet. What about Mars, and what about all these other places, all the craters in the land of Zork or something like that, in the 50th solar system out there, in the nebulae X or something like that? God's creating the whole business. He's creating the whole thing all the time. No, any normal person would say, well, that is just the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. It cannot possibly be. And that's exactly what God wants you to think. Exactly. It makes no sense whatsoever. And our job is to make sense of it. What do you mean? That God really does care. He really cares about every detail. Every detail is tremendously important and meaningful. Every instant of our lives, of everybody's life, is tremendously important. Of some, who knows, some person that's living in Antarctica, or what he's just always thinking about is, how can I catch another seal and give my family to eat? Or somebody in the North Pole, the South Pole, in the middle, whatever it is. Every single human being is important to God. Every animal is important. But people have free will, and Jews have even more free will, because we have this more responsibility. We have responsibility to the Creator. But nevertheless, God creates the world, and we don't feel any responsibility. We don't feel any meaning. We don't feel any Creator. We don't feel any purpose. We don't feel anything. And this is a tremendous descent regarding the essence of God. That it, which was the light of God, which was included in the ultimate meaning and being of the Creator of the universe. And the whole reason God did this crazy thing was because it's important to God that we should elevate it. Liot miyesh, that we should make from this apparently physical existence, la'ayan, to reveal that the world does not really exist on its own independently, that it is being created by God, and God is not a thing. That's what it means. The world, yesh, becomes negated to ayin. Yesh, that the physical world should be negated in the infinite light of God. Okay, now we have a lot of examples of this in the physical world. You can see. Let's take one example: is music. Music. You ever see a piano? Piano is it's a very complicated sort of thing. There's all these pieces of metal, and there's wood, and then there's the hammers that strike onto this, right? And any normal person that looks at it will have no idea what in the world it's talking about. You start touching the notes, and all of a sudden these sounds come out. Each sound is different from every other sound, right? So it makes no sense. The whole thing doesn't make. How much does a good piano cost? You get a good piano, let's say $500,000. So I don't know, a violin, right? You have these violins cost like $5 million or $50 million. I don't. What in the world do you have that for? Just a piece of wood, and it's got a few strings on it, and this thing has cost $5 million. Of course, it was owned by Paganini or somebody like that. Who cares that it's just a piece of wood and some stuff? But then somebody plays it, and all of a sudden you don't see the wood anymore. You don't see the chord. You don't see. All you hear is the beautiful music. In the piano, you hear chords, and you hear this, right? All of a sudden you see harmony, and you see this movement. It moves you. You can start crying. You hear that's how beautiful it is, and another movement and this. But what happens? All of a sudden, the physical becomes transformed to something more. Something more. The aliyah, this is that's music. There's a lot of things that are like that. But suddenly you feel removed from time and space. So really there's a source to the world, and that source of the world is what we should reveal here. The reason why everything has been created. The aliyah, that's the main elevation that we're talking about. The aliyah ikrit, right? On this elevation that we feel the Creator in the creation, we feel the reason for the creation, we feel the harmony and the beauty in every detail of creation. This is the main elevation that it says about in Psalms. King David, I think it's Psalm 104, there's Liviatan ze yitzarta l'sachek bo. It says that God, you made this big fish called Leviathan, and you made it in order to be happy in it. What do you mean happy? You have happiness and joy lamaila by God. God is actually happy. We're happy when somebody takes a violin or whatever and plays it and sounds good. God is happy when we take this world and we play it. When we Jewish people take the world and we use it for godliness, that makes God happy. That's what's called reach nichuach. Shehitavut miyayin liyesh, that went from God to create the world from his, so nothing, God is not a thing, from nothing to something. This is the creation. Like it says, v'chachma mi'ayin timotze. Like it says, and this is a sentence in Job. It says that chachma, there's 10 aspects of God. The highest aspect of God is what's called chachma. What does it mean, aspects of God? God has a personality. By Judaism, God is not this sort of amorphous, just how do you call it, infinitely high spirit or whatever it is. And he's so, it's infinitely distant from the world. And that in order for God to relate to the world, so he has people or he has something like that. No, it's not so. God, of course, is infinitely far away. That's what we just finished learning. But God is a personality. That's a secret of Kabbalah. What's called the 10 Sfirot. God's personality. God is a personality. God is not limited to being unlimited. God can also limit himself. How God limits himself, that's the Torah. That's what the Torah tells us. What God wants from us, God's nature, if you want to call it. So the highest of the 10 Sfirot of godliness is called Chachma. And Chachma, it says it comes from nothing. Chachma, this is the first of the revelations of God's personality into the worlds. Right? That's what's called God's personality, which is not the case, the creation of the world, something from nothing. This is a total unique change of nature. God has a personality. It says God created us in his image. So we're sort of, God sort of compare God to us. We have a personality. God has a personality. A little bit you can learn from yourself how real God is and how personal God is. But God does something that we can't do. We have chachma, we have bina, we have understanding, we have all these aspects. But God does one thing that we can't do, and that is create from nothing. We can't create nothing. We don't even know what nothing is. We have no how could there be nothing? So God creates everything from nothing. Of course, we call God's true reality nothing because we can't describe it. It's unlimited. But God creates everything. It says that God can do, that's a change of nature. Well, that's what God does. It's a big novelty that God creates the world something from nothing. And what makes God happy? It's like it's done before kings and big, whatever it is, the dukes or something like that. They bring in a dancing bear or a talking bird or, whatever it is, a dog that can sing opera or something like that. The simple of its also the same thing as this. It's also the same thing in Psalms. That God gets happy from what we do here. Also the idea of joining the dibuk hayesh line, that's Leviathan. Leviathan, that fish, the word levoy means to accompany. Okay, so God creates something from nothing. This is a big novelty to us that God does that we don't have. Well, we can do something, so to speak, that God can't do. What is it? Bitul hayesh la'ayin. We can reverse the process. We can return our feeling of separateness to God's infiniteness, which in this world you can't see anything infinite. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows there are big scientists, genius philosophers, right? And they don't see that there's God or God give a Torah, whatever. That's ridiculous. God give a Torah, you can't prove that. There's some people say that, the chances that the world exists on its own, that it was just, created, the evolution is like, they have the numbers, they've got it all figured out, is like, 7 to the 10 to the 20 billionth power, that the world, something that the world can come from, or that your eye can coordinate with your tongue, and that all happened with by evolution. The human beings can speak intelligently. This was done by evolution. The chances are like a 1 to the trillionth power or something like that. Okay, good, but there is 1 to the trillionth power is also a number. It's something. The chances mathematically that God created the world are zero. You can't prove that God created the world. You can't prove God's existence from mathematics, right? God creates the whole world in such a way that the world seems to be totally autonomous, independent. There's no necessity whatsoever to say that God is creating everything right now. Maybe you want to say that God created it like a long time ago. Okay, could be. But that God is creating it right now. And of course, really, the fact that God created it a long time ago also doesn't answer any questions, because it means you're saying that there is such a thing as God. So why did he create it? He created it just for no reason. God just, is bored or something. So what does he do now? Okay, but let's say, but to say that God is creating right now is totally illogical. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's not necessary. You could say God created it a long time ago. There's spiritual forces that created it. What created those spiritual forces? Who knows that? But nevertheless, mathematically, scientifically, whatever, you can't prove God's existence. The only way you can prove God's existence is that you feel that it can't be that the world is just a jungle. It can't be that the Jews are really lying all this time that they received the Torah at Mount Sinai. They passed it down from generation to generation. God took them out of Egypt. Maybe they just made the whole thing. Really? You really think they made it all up? Right? But still, okay, all of this doesn't prove God's existence. The world is an independent entity. For us to take this world and to use the world to actually serve the creator of the universe only for the creator, not for ourselves at all. This is a big novelty. This is a big novelty. For us to serve God so that God will give us the world to come or something, that's no novelty. That's all the religions are like that. But for us to serve God like Abraham did, without thinking about yourself at all, totally, just to do actually physically with this world that seems to exist independent of God. You don't need him at all. You don't have to have God. You don't have to bring him to the formula at all. And Abraham said, yes, God does exist and he's creating me, and I'm going to do what he wants. Why? Because I want to do what he wants. What do you mean, why? What are you going to get out of it? I'm not interested. Not my interest. I don't care. All I know is I have to serve the creator. And God makes all these promises. I mean, they all made all these promises to Abraham, and he reneged on all the promises. He didn't give Abraham the land of Israel, didn't give it to him. Right? And God, Abraham said, I don't care. I'm just serving God. That's what's called taking yesh, the physical world, and returning it back to nothing. This is what's called bittul gashmir. It's called a surrender of the physical to the spiritual. Huh? But the fact is, it's not really that. That's a misnomer. Be'emet, really, Lamaila, also the spiritual is also a creation. It's also a creation. It says that everything in the physical world has some sort of spiritual power that enlivens it. And these spiritual powers, they're also the creations. It says that the spiritual powers they receive from what's called Shmoria Ophanim, from the dregs of the angels. And these angels called the Ophanim, they receive from the Chayot HaKodesh, and the Chayot HaKodesh from this, and they receive from the Seraphim. So there's all these spiritual levels that there are above, and the all business, the whole entire thing, all the spiritual levels that all the non-Jews worship, those are just creations. The spiritual are also just physical. They're also just creations from nothing. It says that the mazel, this spiritual level that we get, this is like nothing compared to the lower angels called the wheels, and the wheels are nothing compared to the Chayot HaKodesh, and etc. And on this it says, called Bali Shir Yotzim Bashir. So the difference between this world and the spiritual worlds is that we don't feel God. The upper worlds, the spiritual worlds, the angels, they feel God. They feel God. And God, because God is infinitely real, and he's real in all these different dimensions of reality. So each level of angels are totally flipped out by the level which is of reality, which is above them and created them. And that's the song that the angels are singing. You look in the visions of Ezekiel and of Isaiah, especially Ezekiel. And he talks about these amazing visions of angels that he has, that the angels are singing up there. That's the pleasure of going out from their own self to a higher level. What's this got to do with the sacrifices? We're going to find out, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's go